Did you ever talk about some of the things we've just talked about in this, like Aristotle and Plato, and whether those three men, like Judge Silverman at the appeals court here, or Justice Scalia at the Supreme Court, or Robert Bork, a former appeals court judge, did they read all the same kind of things that you read?
I think some of them were moved to. Yeah, some of them probably had already. I don't know. But they were interested. I mean, these are not just lawyers. These are not just legal thinkers. All of these people are what we would call intellectuals, namely have a very broad interest in ideas. And the thing they liked about being at AI is they were able to indulge that interest in ideas.
Do you have to be, I don't know how to ask this, do you have to be smart to be an intellectual?
It helps.
And when I say smart, do you know what that means? Is there a cutoff point at that IQ level?
No, no. It means you have to be able to cope with abstract ideas comfortably, or uncomfortably sometimes, but that's all right too, wrestling with them. But, I mean, there are a lot of people, I suppose most people, can get along very well without coping with abstract ideas, and that's okay too. But yes, I think you have to be pretty smart to be an intellectual.
You mentioned the reading about theology. Where do you come out in your, I think you wrote in here, you're 75, right?
Yeah.
In your 75th year about God.
Oh, I've never had a problem with God. Never. Even when I was a young Trotskyist, I never had a problem with God. I mean, the so-called existence of God was never a problem for me. I mean, however you define God, and that is a serious theological matter. What you mean when you use the word God is a serious theological matter. But I had no doubt, ever since I read the opening of the Bible, that yes, there is such a thing as original sin, and we all live with it. And if you want to understand the human condition, reading the opening of the Bible is as good a place as any, the best, I think. And so that part of religion has simply never been a problem for me.
The last several essays in your book of the 41 is about Judaism, or about being a Jew.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you? Are you a practicing Jew?
Sort of. That is, I'm a member of a Jewish congregation. And I go to synagogue on the high holidays. I attend bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. I do not observe Jewish law because I never did. I think if I had it to do over again, I would be more observant. But I don't have it to do over again. And I'm not going to completely change my life now. That's rather silly, I think. But being Jewish has never been a problem for me.
What does that mean?
Well, you know...
What is being Jewish? I mean, what's the culture?
Well, it's not a question of culture. It's a question of identity. I always knew I was Jewish. I never thought of not being Jewish. I was always very pleased to be Jewish, after all. Not everyone is a member of the chosen people. So I just went along, even when I was not all that observant. I still am not all that observant. Being Jewish just came naturally to me.
Another thing that I counted up in the book was mentions in the book about different people. This is not scientific, and I actually checked the index and counted them up. But I thought it was interesting on presidents. How many times presidents were mentioned? And I don't even know if you know this or not.
No.
The president mentioned the most was Ronald Reagan. He's mentioned on 11 different pages. By the way, John Kennedy, Harry Truman, and Jimmy Carter are not mentioned at all.
I admired John F. Kennedy and voted for him, but the importance of Ronald Reagan for someone like myself, a neoconservative, is that he brought neoconservatism into the conservative spectrum. Ronald Reagan was the first Republican president to praise Franklin D. Roosevelt. Newt Gingrich has since followed him in that. Now, this was a breakthrough. It meant that the Republican Party, unlike, say, the Goldwater Republican Party of 1964, was no longer fighting against the New Deal. That it was possible to think of reforming many of the institutions bequeathed to us by the New Deal, but that the issue of the New Deal was behind us, and acceptance of the New Deal in principle, if not in all of its details, was one of the basic differences between neoconservatives and traditional Republican conservatives who were still fighting against the New Deal. But once Ronald Reagan began praising Franklin D. Roosevelt as a kind of predecessor, and as I say, Newt Gingrich does exactly the same thing now, the Republican Party has changed. Not everyone in the Republican Party has changed, but it is an important fact that these two leaders who helped define the modern Republican Party spoke so well of Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Any idea why you wouldn't write much about John F. Kennedy or Jimmy Carter?
Well, Jimmy Carter didn't exist for me. It's as simple as that. John F. Kennedy I admired. As I say, I voted for him. I thought he had the potential to be a great president, and then, of course, he was assassinated. I was somewhat disillusioned by the time he was assassinated. But why didn't I write about John F. Kennedy? Maybe I did at some point. I don't know. I think what happened is that he was out of the picture, that he had been gone, before I started writing steadily on current affairs, which really began in the late 60s, early 70s.
Today, do you still have a relationship with the Wall Street Journal?
Yes, I still write occasionally on their op-ed page a short essay. I used to write much more frequently, and I think age is beginning to show. And also, I don't want to keep repeating myself, so I don't write unless I feel I have something to say. But yes, I'm still happy to have this wonderful relationship with the Wall Street Journal.
Go back and trace, as you do in the book, all the connecting points with the National Review and the Wall Street Journal editorial page and Bob Bartley and you and how you get to where you are today.
A lot of connections. I never had much of a connection with National Review. I think I've written for it once, but I became more and more friendly with Bill Buckley in the course of the late 60s and 1970s.
Where were you in the late 60s? Where'd you live?
I was, before getting a teaching position at NYU, I was executive vice president of the publishing house, Basic Books, then a very small publishing house, it is by now grown. And I was in the book publishing business, but I was at the same time writing. And in 1965, I had started, along with Dan Bell, this quarterly magazine of ours, The Public Interest, which is just celebrating its 30th anniversary. Where were we?
Well, we wanted to go from there. We were talking through the National Review. As a matter of fact, you say in the early days that the National Review and you didn't agree.
Yes, I wrote about the National Review in rather critical terms. It was not my kind of conservative view. It was really old-fashioned Republican conservatism, Herbert Hoover conservatism, you might say, or Calvin Coolidge conservatism. Neither of those two presidents have ever been icons of mine. So I was aloof from them. Now, in the case of the Wall Street Journal, that was to some degree just happenstance. Bob Bartley read The Public Interest after it was founded in 1965, and apparently got very interested in it sufficiently to write a piece for the Journal, whose title I well remember, as you can understand why. It was Irving, Kristol, and Friends.
And Bob Bartley is today the editorial page.
Bob Bartley was then in the Washington office, a reporter for the Journal. He then became editor of the editorial page. Today he's editor of the Wall Street Journal. In those days, once he became editor of the editorial page, he asked me to write regularly for them, which of course I was happy to do. And that began a relationship which has lasted, and a friendship which has lasted to this day. What other connection are you interested in?
Well, but in the middle of all this, you more than once referred to the ideas matter. And I guess that's what I'm getting at is, how do ideas move in the society? And your public interest publication went to the Wall Street Journal, you know, and now this is new public. How would you assess your son's position at this point with that publication? How does that relate to the discussion going on in town?
Well, my son's magazine is going to be a conservative magazine, independent conservative, and whether it could be called neoconservative by now almost doesn't matter. But ideas do matter, and my son, I guess, learned that in our household, since both his mother and father believed that. We have always believed that. That we learned from the left, by the way. I mean, the left has always understood that ideas matter. Since, if you look at the Russian Revolution, it was created by a small handful of people with ideas, as was, in fact, the French Revolution. Ideas do matter. The right has rarely understood that, the right being more interested in pragmatic affairs, business and government, and as an administrative organism. And one of the things I think neoconservatism has contributed to contemporary conservatism is a strong belief and a strong acknowledgement that ideas do matter. Newt Gingrich believes that ideas matter. I think the presidencies of Reagan and the current control of Congress show that ideas, in fact, do matter.